You're listening to Cinema Rex. It is an Iranian film podcast. Episode 25, Majidi's Baran. I'm going to ask you a question, Farhan.
Hit me.
How well do you know your German expressionist films?
Not at all.
So if I do a roundtable discussion right now where we all discuss our favorite German expressionist films, do you just take a seat in the corner and wait for your
Basically,
turn?
I don't think I could name a single one.
Durud ba shoma dostan aziz. This is the Cinema Rex podcast where we talk all things Iranian films, cinema, weather, music, lighting,
Construction sites.
rain, puddles, footprints. I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
And I'm Farhan Moradi.
You couldn't name a single German expressionist film?
I don't think I can. And honestly, I'm going to take zero of the blame. I think you should talk to my film profs from film school and take it up with them.
Well, if we had one on the show. Oh, look at that. We have a guest on our show who you can put all your blame on. Today's guest is Aisha Jamal. She's a filmmaker and film programmer based in Toronto. Her films often center on people and their resilience in life and have played venues and festivals worldwide. Aisha's feature film debut, A Kandahar Way, about her family's connection to the small Saskatchewan hamlet of Kandahar, premiered in 2019 at the Hot Docs Documentary Film Festival in Toronto and is currently available to stream on CBC Gem. Her previous short films include the award-winning The Long Way Home and Seeds of the Past. She recently directed, co-produced, and co-wrote the documentary web series How We Die, an 11-part series about rethinking our relationships to death and dying. Her latest short film, Field Notes, about bird advocates, premiered at Hot Docs in 2023. Aisha holds a PhD from the University of Toronto in German cinema, and she teaches part-time. Welcome to the show, Aisha. Nice to meet you.
I do have an update. I teach full-time now, sadly.
Oh, sweet. Awesome. Well, we'll just redact that and correct it right here via conversation.
Okay.
Between the two of us, I think Farn would agree. I'm like the more I don't know if it's the art house cinephile, but
Between you and I, not between you and Aisha.
no, of course not. So I guess the first question I have for you is, am I right to blame you for Farhan's lack of knowledge when it comes to German expressionist films?
Listen, I taught Farhan for like 3.5 months, so which is not long enough to really imbue good taste in him. But he has seen German expressionist films. Farhan, must I remind you of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, of which I showed you an excerpt?
Oh, okay. Excerpts don't count.
That's true.
We watched in one class, we'd watched excerpts from 6 movies.
Yeah, exactly. We had 3.5 months to make it through 100 years of cinema. So
That's true. Yeah.
we did definitely look at different movements. So you are aware of German expressionism, at least.
Yes.
I've done my job.
Yes.
And there's the old adage as well that you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him watch Nosferatu. So that's the famous quote. I looking at your bio, I do have some questions about you and your career and the works you've done in the past.
Please, go ahead. I'm ready to answer.
First question is, how do we die exactly?
You know what? We die in many different ways depending on your cultural background. But there are many things we need to do to fix how we die in the West.
Such as?
Such as not being scared of talking about death and grief and acknowledging it. Maybe perhaps imbuing more rituals into our lives. That definitely proves that it makes it easier.
We're censoring all this stuff about talking about death. We're very fearful here.
I think we definitely are. We sanitize it in a way. Even think about who comes to get the bodies and how we conduct funerals. And I think there are many cultures that are much more in touch with dying bodies and the idea of grief and death and afterlife.
Well, and I think it's bad too, because then if you're in a position where you're now responsible for taking care of a loved one who died, you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And you rely on other people who've done it to show you, because you don't talk about it outside of that environment.
Yeah, and people often tell you to get over it if it's been a year, So I feel like we don't really make it part of our lives. I think that incorporating it more, the only thing we all have in common is that we're all going to die.
Yes.
So why is it that we don't talk about it?
Yeah.
So is there a common theme or thread in all of your works that you find you naturally are grasping towards in all your work? I noticed your latest project is on bird advocacy.
No, actually that's the one that I finished. Right now I've been working for 3 years on a project that has to do more with art restitution and provenance and blah, blah.
Oh, wow.
So that subject matter. But I think what really threads it all together is I'm really interested in people So I feel like a lot of my films rely on strong characters and on profiles
Mhm.
of personalities more than anything.
Very cool. My last question, this does lead more into discussing cinema. Why German cinema? And let's talk a little bit about German expressionist films or German films in general.
You know what? I did a double major as an undergrad in international relations. And then I took a course in German literature because it was the only thing that fit my schedule. And my prof was so amazing. I got deeply into it. So I double majored in German and international relations. And then always had a deep love of film and I wanted to do graduate studies in film. So I brought it all together. I did a PhD on a political topic related to German cinema.
That's really cool. I did a double major in history and political science, and I got really interested in like East German Stasi and like the entire like division of East and West Germany and like what their practices were. Because I also like did some course on espionage and stuff. And to this day, one of my top 5 favorite films of all time
is The Lives of Others. Yes.
And I've been trying to get Faran to watch it with me. It's like
it's so good.
I honestly think top 5 films of all time. Like
him saying I'm trying to get Faran to watch it with me doesn't have to do with me resisting. It has to do with Kaveh has a very busy schedule as a father of 2 children.
Well, you know what, Faran, you're overdue because that film is incredibly good.
Yeah.
Is it your where does it rank? What's your favorite German film?
Do you know what? I have to say that as someone who watches a lot of cinema and really loves film, it's so hard for me to answer questions of like, what are your top 10 films? Because it changes all the freaking time. And sometimes I forget about a film and then I'll mention it and then I'll like not think about it for years. But do I think of it as one of the top films I've seen and do I enjoy it every time I see it? Yes.
Yes, The Lives of Others. I also do want to say just shout out to like I got really early education in cinema through German expressionist films.
Oh, wonderful.
My cousin, who will be a future guest on the podcast, she bought me a DVD copy of Cabinet of Dr. Caligari when I was 14 and a DVD copy of M, Fritz Lang's M.
Oh God, both of them brilliant films.
Masterpieces, and just kind of influenced my shit. Because at the time I remember like asking for DVDs to like add to my collection.
Yeah.
And I was thinking I would get like just rom-coms or I was like, oh, there's something about like I was looking for like Dumb and Dumber or like Batman, and she got me these films. And I was like, what are these movies? And I sort of like put them on one day, and it sort of was the light bulb moment for me to want to study film. And
yeah,
that was my doorway.
I don't get tired of those films. Like I really can talk about them all the time. I can still watch Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and appreciate it. But I think a lot of people really don't like silent cinema or like black and white cinema. But if you can get over that, they're so brilliant and they're over 100 years old, so that's amazing.
Where's the restoration of Metropolis at? Because I know that every couple of years they're like, oh, we found like another couple minutes of the movie. Like, do you guys know when the last update was on that?
No.
That's a deep cut question.
Because I remember when, I'm pretty sure I was in your class when one of the students was telling me that they had recently found a couple more minutes of the movie somewhere.
That's incredible. Yeah. No, I'd love to see that. I mean, Metropolis has so many remakes as well. So I feel like it's a film that keeps living.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Speaking of remakes too, are you excited that there's a remake of Nosferatu happening with Robert Eggers? It's coming out this year, I think.
Oh, wow. I mean, I would love to see it. Yes, I am excited because I feel like one of my favorite Nosferatus is actually the 1970s version.
Right.
With, I think Werner Herzog directed it.
Yeah.
That I think is like even better than the original, and I rarely say that.
I've only seen that once, but I think I remember liking the original more because of the charm, or not the charm, just the aesthetic of that. I got to rewatch the 70s version.
You do watch it because Klaus Kinski is such a wacky person, and I feel like he really takes Nosferatu to the next level.
But you know Robert Eggers, like, have you like seen to the In the Lighthouse or the Lighthouse? The Lighthouse, not the.
That's the black and
he
white
did
one.
The black and white film, and he actually used camera equipment and lighting equipment from the 30s to make that film. So yeah, I think like knowing that it's in Eggers' hands to make this remake it feels like it's not just like a Hollywood like big studio remake for the sake of it. Eggers is going to put the deserved love, attention, and focus to make it faithful.
But you know what? I feel kind of mixed about remakes because I honestly feel like I hope he brings something new to it. But obviously we have to wait till we see it. But otherwise, I've seen remakes where I'm like, why? Why did you bother? You just did the same thing with an updated technology.
Right. Yeah. I didn't even know until like you just said it that there was a 70s Nosferatu. I only knew about the original one.
Oh, really? Yeah, no, I think there's a few remakes actually, but that one.
Interesting.
There's also that film, I forgot the title, but it's with William Dafoe about the making of Nosferatu. It's like a kind of a thriller horror.
That's cool.
About the actor who's playing Nosferatu getting like possessed by a real vampire while they're making the movie.
That's
I
cool.
love how deep we've gone into German cinema on a podcast about Iranian cinema.
Well, it's all connected.
I know.
It's all cinema.
The more we're talking about this, the more I'm like remembering German expressionist films, like The Man Who Laughs, Metropolis, Nosferatu. I'm like, oh yeah, I do know these movies.
I did have time to Google the list of German expressionist
No,
films.
no. You know what I was doing though? I was like, as we were talking, I was like, wait, is Metropolis German expressionist? And then I looked it up, and then it's like German expressionist. I was like, okay. I was like, wait, The Man Who Laughs? And then I looked it up, and I was like, okay. Nosferatu, and I looked it up, and it was so.
Shadow of the Vampire was the one I was thinking of, 2000. It's a film about the crew making Nosferatu, and John Malkovich is in it.
Yeah.
William Dafoe.
And I think I saw that as well, but it doesn't stick in my mind, which means that it did not leave a mark.
It's not that good, but it's just an interesting. I remember being really excited to see it and just being pretty underwhelmed.
Yeah. So I feel like that's probably my reaction because I do remember scenes from it. Because John Malkovich is pretty expressive.
Yes, he is. Speaking of being pretty expressive, Farn, why don't you talk a little bit about what the film is we're doing today, and you two can start the discussion.
It's funny. Usually, the Iranian films that we review have an English name and a Persian name, but this one only goes by Baran. So Baran by Majid Majidi, and this is the first Majid Majidi film that we're doing.
Yes, and what does Baran mean for the uninitiated?
Baran means rain.
You pass.
Thanks, Kaveh. Because Aisha, you speak Pashtun?
I do indeed.
Is Baran also rain in Pashtun or no?
It is, yeah. Baran means the same thing.
Okay, so it's not just Persian and Dari, it's multiple languages.
Exactly. Yes, Baran actually means the same. It's rare because you're right. Often the words in Pashto are so very different than Dari, even though it's the same country. The languages feel sometimes unrelated.
I wonder if it comes from Arabic, because a lot of times if it's the same word in like multiple countries, I don't know. I don't want to guess and then get blown up in the DMs again.
Baran. Lateef is a 17-year-old boy who works at a construction site managed by Maymar. He serves tea and food for the workers, with whom he frequently quarrels. Some of the workers are refugees from Afghanistan who have no identity cards and are employed illegally. When an Afghan worker, Najaf, falls, breaking his leg, his 14-year-old son, Rahmat, is brought in to replace him. Lateef is initially hostile to Rahmat until one day he is shocked to discover that Rahmat is a girl. As he watches her comb her hair, he becomes enamored as he hears her sing. From then on, Lateef becomes protective, helpful, and desperately in love with Rahmat. While the ever-silent Rahmat watches Lateef with a distant curiosity. During a surprise visit, inspectors discover Rahmat working illegally. She panics and flees, and they pursue her. Lateef restrains the inspectors, allowing Rahmat to escape. Lateef is beaten and arrested, and Maymar must pay a fine, comply with the law, and lay off all illegal Afghans working for him. Lateef can't bear Rahmat's absence and takes time off work to track her down, where he eventually discovers her family is in desperate need of money. Lateef is distressed, wants to find a way to help Rahmat and her family. It is at this time he discovers Rahmat's real name is Baran. Lateef sells the only valuable thing he has, his identity card. When he brings the money, Lateef learns that Najaf and his family will use it to return to Afghanistan. The next day, while helping Najaf to load a truck with household effects, Lateef is finally face to face with Baran. Through eye contact and proximity, they exchange their feelings of love as the two part ways, perhaps never to see one another again. It has a Rotten Tomato score of 89%, certified fresh, and an audience score of 90%. So Aisha, I ask you, what do you think of Baran?
Okay, I am so old that I saw this film when it came out 20 years ago in Vancouver. At that time, I remember being incredibly grateful to see a representation of Afghans because we were not in the cinema very often. And the only way you would see Afghans was in the films of Iranians, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remembered liking the film and thinking about it as like these construction workers, but I didn't remember the big reveal. And then when I saw it this time, I actually did catch me by surprise. I was like, oh, right.
Oh, wow.
This film is about a bacha posh, as we say in Afghanistan. I felt mixed about it this time. I think in the 20 years since, I've watched a lot of cinema and think about it a bit more critically. Mm-hmm. So I think I've had a mixed reaction this time, but
so it was you had a high reaction the first time. Would you say that you?
Yeah, I remember coming out of the cinema and having seen Baran. Even when Farhan mentioned that you guys are doing an episode on Baran, I remember liking the film, and I remember it was about a construction site. So I had these vague memories, but the overall feeling was I liked that film.
Cool. Let's start a new category, a one-time category we'll never have again. Let's hear Farhan on Baran.
I like the film. There's things that I think probably didn't age very well, but overall, it was entertaining. It was the first time I had seen it. I've seen a couple other of Majidi's films. Something that I find is like pretty consistent with his work is his work feels more Western, like in the aesthetic representation of the movie than a lot of other Iranian filmmakers. Like it's very traditional and like, oh, here's like the way that things are blocked and the shot composition. Like it feels very American in a lot of ways.
Yeah, he uses a crane. He uses a crane for a lot of his shots.
Yeah, he does. There's a couple moments where it like the scene starts on this establishing shot of a bunch of people in a room, and then it like cranes down and you reveal someone in the foreground. Things like that didn't really happen a lot in Iranian cinema. Oh, just a couple things that I wrote down that I really liked about the film. I really liked the character Memar and his little idiosyncrasies. A lot of the characters had cool idiosyncrasies. Like with Memar, every time he would get worked up and he'd get angry, he'd switch into Azeri, which I thought was funny.
Oh, I didn't even notice.
Oh yeah, that happens a lot of times when like if you're speaking in a language that's not your first language, if you get pissed off or you get really emotional, you default to your own native language, right? I also found it interesting that in the workplace, initially at least, he was trying to advocate more for the Afghan workers against the Persian-speaking workers because, and I think it's because he himself is from a like minority culture, minority language in Iran, like as an Azeri, that he's probably used to constantly getting shit on by the Persian-speaking majority. So I thought it was an interesting character note that he was trying to show more leniency and compassion to the Afghan workers than the Persians were. I thought the music in the film was really good. There's a couple moments in the film where there's score. Like one that stood out to me was after we find out that Baran is a boy and Lateef is like watching her walking around the construction site serving people tea. There's a very beautiful piece of music that plays. And it stood out to me because it uses Iranian instruments. Well, it uses Eastern instruments in a way that's more of like a Western score. Like it's not like a traditional Eastern song, like the way that the musical scale is not a traditional Eastern musical scale, but it uses traditional Eastern instruments, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, I like the movie. My biggest takeaway from it was I actually thought this was a film that I recognized its lighting. I'd never really noticed lighting in film like I did this one. For the first half of the movie, you're on a construction site, and the use of lighting little areas like the kitchen nook where she essentially is keeping the fridge and stuff was lit so beautifully. And it drew my attention to the fact that there was so much attention to detail and where the lights are on a construction site, and to make it look, each floor looked unique and special, and each nook had its own kind of vibe. That was in a weird way, found it breathtaking. I found it really interesting. One of the questions I have for you, so you guys can think about, we can get into a deeper analysis, is this a film about gender politics, or is this a film about Afghan refugees?
I mean, if this was about gender politics, Kaveh, then this film would fail, because I think one of the things I don't like, and I think it doesn't age well for, is its gender politics.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's really disregarding gender politics and really focusing much more on the plight of Afghans and the idea of identity. And like, I think one of the things I loved about the movie was its sort of approach to humanism. And I think that's like something I enjoy in Iranian cinema, really thinking about what unites us, what bonds us, how do you get over these kinds of differences. And I thought that as a sentiment was beautiful in the film. Not always well executed, but sort of a beautiful idea.
Yeah, I'll elaborate what I meant by not that the film is about gender politics, but the use of the androgyny and the ambiguation of her gender could be used as a we'll get to it when we get to deeper analysis. But you're absolutely right. Like the humanist side of this bratty sort of selfish kid who is a little bit like stubborn, and you see him gradually change over this course of the film, who becomes very selfless and very kind and caring and protective, is a beautiful story. It's a very fundamental human story, which is very good to see.
And it's not even gradual. It's literally, he sees her brush her hair and all of a sudden his face softens. And he's a new human.
Yeah. That was definitely a bit of a heel turn for me, because I was like, this whole time, like especially these, he mentions that Najaf and him were tight, and then now he's like an asshole to his kid. And then Sultan is also being like really nice to him repeatedly.
Yeah.
And he's just like constantly treating both of them like garbage. And then all of a sudden now he's like, you know what? I'm going to take care of them now. It's like, no. You don't get to like pour plaster water on them and like go make a mess of the kitchen that Baran has to work in and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden be like, oh, you know what? I changed my mind.
Yeah.
But he combs his hair and puts on a nice shirt. It's very sweet.
He goes to work looking like a pop star. I know.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that a little bit because, Iranian films are often so realist. And this was like a fantasy moment. Did you guys notice how like the wind started blowing as he's watching her?
Yeah.
And like this transformation moment, I was like, this truly is like where it goes into the surreal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, even you bringing up wind, the thing that prompts him to look into the kitchen is a strong gust of wind that hits him in the face. And then he like follows the direction of the wind and looks. And then the veil starts to, or the curtain starts to flow. And he's like looking past the curtain.
He even softens his facial expression and puckers his lips. I was like, oh my Lord.
Yeah. I love that Memoir calls him out for his fancy clothes.
Yeah.
He's like, why are you wearing, and the word he uses, he's like, why are you wearing Zhiguli clothes? Like, why are you wearing this frou-frou outfit?
Yeah. The subtitles though did say pop star, which I did like. I'm like, why are you dressed like a pop star? I'm like, nice. That's funny.
But you liked it, Kaveh, overall?
Yeah, I liked it. I honestly think I think the script is fine. And I think from a writing standpoint, dialogue is fine. I thought this is a film that like, I thought the language of its poetry was truly cinematic and not through character development and story arcs, really. So I would commend it on that side, like the lighting, the cinematography, the direction, and a lot of that stuff. The visual poetry of the film is top notch. Yeah. But from a character standpoint and like a quote unquote, lack of a better term, hero's journey. I know that you don't really have to dissect these kind of film in that lens, but I found it like pretty like average, in that front.
I agree with you.
Yeah, the script is just, a dime a dozen. Yeah,
and I also find some of the lines are a bit clumsy, but overall, I think the film for me, when I think about it now, like I do have a mixed reaction to it, but I did love the use of symbolism. I did love some of what he's trying to say. I can totally get behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't think it's executed in like the most beautiful way. I am a big Majidi fan. Like I do love Children of Heaven and I do love Color of Paradise. But this one I would say is probably his most mixed film for me.
When was the last time you saw those two films? Because I wonder if you watch those again.
I saw Children of Heaven 3 months ago. Again.
Oh.
And I analyzed it with my class.
And does it still stand the test of time?
Do you know, it's a little bit long and I do feel like there's some like cheesy components to it. But yes, I always feel like I love the feeling of that film and like its discussion of poverty is like eternally touching.
Yeah.
Color of Paradise I haven't seen in a few years. And I remember back then feeling like the ending was really tragic and it really made me weep.
Yeah.
That's what I remember about that one.
That one I remember at the time a lot of my Iranian relatives were like, this is exploitative, like the ending.
It was a really, really touching ending. So I don't know how I'd feel if I watched it again now, but I do remember back then being like, it's devastating. But
yeah. It started a trend of a lot of Iranian films around that time, like making everything have a depressing ending where like everybody dies or like.
Oh, for sure. I can completely see that, because that film was so successful.
Does the film ever explain the cultural backgrounds of the other people who work at the construction site that are not Afghan, Azeri, or Persian?
No, I mean, I'm not as well versed as you guys probably are in like what some of the accents are in Farsi. But
you're probably better versed than I am in that subject because I'm born in Vancouver.
I was born in Coburg. So.
Yeah.
I was born in Kandahar.
Oh.
Kandahar, Saskatchewan, or which Kandahar?
Good one. In the OG. Afghanistan.
Yeah. Nice, the original.
Yeah, shout out to your film Kandahar Away. It is very good. I liked it a lot.
Oh, thank you so much.
Did you guys find that he was like unrealistically fast when he was chasing after the inspectors?
My God.
They were all really fast. They're all so fast.
I know, I was about to say, I'm like, what was impressive is like all of them were so agile, so quick. I was like, whoa.
Yeah. I actually had a note that the inspector character, I was like, wow, for a day player, this guy's putting in work. Like the actor. I was like, this guy's like, I have one scene, I'm in for like 20 minutes, I gotta kill it. And he's just like giving it his all in his running. But then Lateef is like on the roof of the building and somehow he manages to like get all the way down the building, run like across the courtyard, and not just catch up, but like overtake the first inspector and then tackle the second one. I was like, this guy is a gazelle.
This is like the part of the film where it goes into fantasy land. Like after he discovers she's a woman, I'm like, wow, this film really takes a lot of liberties.
Yeah. He was imbued with superhuman agility.
Love is what made him right on his foot.
I just wanted to echo what you said about Maymar. I thought Maymar was I liked his characterization of like a pretty aggressive businessman, but when push came to shove, he showed to be very caring of Lateef. He was like time and time again giving him money when he needed to. He was caring about his workers. I like that characterization. He wasn't one note. And the crane shot that I mentioned is when you first meet who you think is Rahmat and it's Baran. First of all, when they arrive, both of them, it's pouring rain out. So of course it's raining when Baran shows up for the first time. It's like really bad rainfall. They walk into the construction site and they go up 3 floors of the construction site, and the camera, it's a 2-minute tracking shot that never leaves them. But the center of the building is still emptied out, and they're working along the perimeter. And the camera goes on a crane up 3 floors as we watch Rahmat and Sultan, character, the family friend, take her up the stairs to meet the boss. It's just a beautiful shot. The first time you see him, 2 minutes, uninterrupted.
There's so many beautiful shots, I would say. Like, I even love the shot when we went from above. Lateef refuses to come downstairs, and you see them all sitting around a table being served. And it's just gorgeous because it's like you get such an overview. And I feel like this film has so many extreme wide shots where you get a real sense of the construction side and of the sort of architecture of it all. And I was like, it was pretty stunning. Really beautiful compositions.
Yeah, the composition is beautiful without looking too staged either.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes when you have like beautiful composition, it's like, oh, you can tell that someone instructed everyone to like sit here, put your hand like this. Now you duck so your face doesn't cover this. But this was like very naturalistic in the positioning and the blocking, and the composition was still beautiful.
Yeah, there was so many poetic moments, like when he happens upon Baran feeding the pigeons when she's sitting by herself. It was so beautifully composed, that image. She's in the corner and the pigeons and the light coming through that unfinished window. So I feel like there were many breathtaking moments where I was like, wow, this is so painterly.
I wonder if, I didn't really even note this for my deeper analysis, but I wonder if how much that construction, like not as we're talking about, I feel like that construction site is so integral to the structure of the film. Like as if that old cliche of like the setting can be a character too. That construction site does very much feel like it's part of that world and it's integral to the setting. And I don't know if there's something metaphorical to grasp from that, allegorical.
I do think so. I feel like I thought about the construction site as sort of a metaphor of like Iran's relationship to Afghans as well, because all of the people toiling there are these Afghans building apartments for rich Iranians. And I thought that was a beautiful metaphor for like these social relations, you know?
Yeah, I made a note that the construction site to me felt like a stand-in for like the cultural fabric for the whole region. And like there's such a history with like the hundreds of cultures that are all within these like 2 to 3 countries that goes back like thousands of years. And even within that, you have different cultures within the countries that all have to like coexist and work together to try to do something. But this building is still having like all these issues as they're building it. Like the engineer comes and he's like, the top 2 floors are crumbling. Like, what the hell is this? You know what would have been nice? If there was a note that they're like, oh, this is American cement, that's why it's crumbling or something.
That's true. That would have been great. What a good singer.
Behind the scenes of trivia. This was selected as Iran's submission in the best foreign film category in the 2001 Oscars. And every time we do a director for the first time, I'll do a quick little bio on Majidi. He was born April 17th, 1959 in a middle-class family in Tehran. At the age of 14, he started acting in amateur theater groups. He then studied at the Institute of Dramatic Arts in Tehran. After the Iranian Revolution in 1979, his interest in cinema brought him to act in various films, most notably Mohsen Makhmalbaf's Boycott in 1985. In 1997, Majidi directed Children of Heaven, which was nominated to receive the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film and is the first Iranian film to have been nominated by the Academy. Is that true that you got that right, Aisha? Is that
Yeah, yeah.
Did you mention that in your class? Because I wasn't sure if that was. I couldn't remember. I thought it was a Kiarostami film, but I guess it wasn't.
No, it's Majidi. Isn't that so confusing? Because
It's very confusing.
Spiritually, it feels like a Kiarostami film, but
Yeah.
it's definitely. Did you also notice, like, the thing that I thought was kind of funny is the running scene was almost the same in the way it was shot as the one in Children of Heaven.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a Majidi
Oh,
trademark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In 2009, many filmmakers came out in support of the reform movement and its presidential candidates, and many boldly supported the post-election protests. Some filmmakers were arrested, while others, such as Majidi, were banned from leaving the country as they were about to board planes. These and other forms of internal exile did not deter the filmmakers and their supporters. However, many launched discursive campaigns of their own using the media and the internet. In 2016, in an interview, he was asked why he chose to stay in Iran while other filmmakers have left. He said, "My answer to you is why should I leave? A filmmaker or artist belongs to its roots. The product of wherever you are in the world should be homegrown. Artists and filmmakers belong to one's nation. I'll use the example of a tree. A tree can only be planted in a home soil. If you take the tree and plant it elsewhere, you won't have the same effect, and that's the same on our cinema. Our identity as artists come from where the work is born. Then we need to take it worldwide from there."
I mean,
That's just what he said. I don't know if I necessarily agree, but
oh my
that's
God,
just how
I
he answered the
vehemently
question.
disagree. I feel
Yes.
like that. I hate that kind of like patriotism. Like, to me, that just is like, ugh. As humans, we migrate, we live in diasporas, we choose to leave, we are forced to leave, and we can still make art.
Yeah.
So I don't believe that you just have to stay home. But I think he sounds a lot like Jafar Panahi, who says the same thing.
Jafar
I think there's a difference, though.
Yeah.
To me, at least. A big difference to me is that Panahi, I feel, is the type of person who wants to stay and fight, and to be like leaving is giving in. And he's like vehemently opposed to the government of Iran, and he like wants it to topple. All his movies are about women's rights. He's like very much trying to fight against the system. Whereas Majidi is a reformist. He's like, no, well, we should like work with the government and like slowly change things and blah, 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 blah. And that's why internally Majidi gets a lot of criticism from the Iranian people, whereas Panahi is seen as like a bit of a hero.
Yeah, but I think what I'm talking about is more this idea of where they both think their creativity comes from. Because Panahi says the same thing. He says, my creativity comes very much from the soil of where I'm born, and I don't want to leave because if I leave, my filmmaking ends. And I feel like that sounds a lot like Majidi, like this idea of the tree and you stay close to home because it feeds your creativity.
I'm a little bit dubious on Majidi in total analysis of his career because he is, by all accounts, quite dogmatic, spiritual, Islamic. So much so that he made like the Muhammad biopic about his life as a child. And a lot of criticism towards Majidi might be rightfully so because he seems to be cozying up to a lot of the members of government for the last 20 years. And I found this quote from a book from Hamid Nafisi's A History of Iranian Social Cinema. I'm going to put the quote out there. I couldn't corroborate it with anything else, but it raised an eyebrow for me. Following the death of Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989, Majidi, along with the filmmakers Javad Shamakhdari, Nasser Sorudi, Atayollah Salamanian, and Abbas Nasseri, made a film called Sunshine and Love, called Aftab ve Ishq, which compiled poignant images of ordinary people's outpouring of love, emotion for the deceased leader into an 80-minute elegy.
I have one thing to say to that.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I thought you had some. Okay. So with that being said, I mean, at first I thought I was like, oh, interesting. He made like a controversial like satire, but then I read it again. I'm like, oh no, this sounds like it's a genuine outpouring of love for Khomeini, which I don't know, man. Like that does not age well.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's like the thing. That's why I feel like this is not a film about gender politics either, because I don't think this man is very clued into certain aspects or doesn't want to touch certain things. So he stays sort of clear and makes these like humanist films that, don't touch religion necessarily or don't criticize gender either.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just going to end up doing a lot of aping of what other cinema profs have said about like just a deeper analysis of what can be interpreted from his work, not necessarily what he's trying to say.
Right.
But we'll get there.
I just want to quickly comment on the Muhammad biopic that you were talking about.
Yeah.
He received a lot of backlash for that film from two different sides. One was from a lot of Sunni countries banned the film in their countries because they were like, this is heretical.
We can't depict Muhammad.
Yeah, but he does not. He specifically made the film in a way that like followed the guidelines of what you're allowed and not allowed to do, and he kind of like skirts as close as he can to the line. But I guess for Shias, it was like the line is a little further than it is for Sunnis. And so a lot of like quote unquote devout Muslims were like, ban this movie. A lot of Sunnis were like, ban this movie. And then on the flip side, a lot of the secular, agnostic, atheist, non-Muslim population of Iran were like, this movie's terrible, it's propaganda, all this stuff, because they were like, this is theocratic propaganda. And that was kind of the last nail in the coffin for a lot of the Iranian cinephiles that I've spoken to about their reception of Majidi.
I haven't seen the film, but I kind of agree with all the people who criticize it.
The hardliner Muslims, right? You agree with that?
Yes, very much in bed with those guys. No, I think the idea that, because then the Islamic government was fully on board with the film and wanted to promote it, and actually was like gave their tacit approval to make it the entry for the Academy Awards that year, Iran's official entry to the Academy Awards. And I just wondered, like, as someone who's like an atheist, borderline agnostic, I kind of feel my red flags go up with anyone who wants to like focus their career around making any spiritual figure, you know, whether it's Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ or Majidi's Muhammad biopic. Like, I'm just kind of like, why tailor your career around this specific thing? Like, what do you want to say?
But I guess he's like a believer. That's why. And you are not. And that's the difference. And also,
Right.
like, I think Majidi also refused to go to, was it Denmark? Because they had desecrated Muhammad in some cartoons. So I feel like
Yeah.
he is a believer. And that's, you know, he keeps that a little bit out of his films. But it is, you know.
But I think the idea of being a believer comes with caveats when you think about the time and place you're making.
Yeah,
a certain film.
oh, for sure.
Like, to be a believer in Iran in the 50s meant something different than being a believer and wanting to proselytize a prophet in the post-Islamic revolution Iran. Like, it says different things about the type of believer you are.
Oh, for sure. But also, do you guys feel like, does it not make you question why they would put him under house arrest then? Like, this man seems to really toe the line, and then they're like, oh no, you can't leave the country.
I think he was put under house arrest at a time when they were pushing back on reformists.
Oh, okay.
This movie came out later, and this movie is kind of, because it was like funded by the Iranian government. So I think there was part of it was this was like a way to make amends and cozy up to the government. That's the thing that bothers me about it. Like, look, if you're a devout Muslim and you want to make a movie about Muhammad, by all means, go ahead. Like, I think that's fine. That's great. You're making a film for your community, right? And everyone should have that right. If Mel Gibson wants to make a movie about Christ for Catholics, sure, go nuts. If Steven Spielberg wants to make a movie about Moses, go nuts. But the thing that bothers me is that this film had the support and funding of the government of Iran. That's the part that I'm like, okay, this is like straight up government propaganda. This is no longer, and if you are a believer, if you are to be like, Muhammad is a messenger of God, he's a prophet, all this stuff, you should be like doubly insulted that a government institution is behind the mandate of this film. I think that ends up bordering on like blasphemy if you are a spiritual person.
Yeah, I mean, I think the context in which he's making this religious work is deeply problematic, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, one other like a metric that I just wanted to shout out. In 2001, the Afghan population of Iran was estimated to be between 1.5 and 2 million people. Today, that population is about 3 to 5 million. Also, lately, in the last like couple years, there's been a dramatic increase in hate crimes against Afghans in Iran. I think it's worth calling out. Also, the names of some of the characters in the film, I thought are worth mentioning, because there's like no subtext to some of these names. So Memar, who's like I guess he's like what the head of the construction company or the foreman or whatever. The name Memar means builder.
That's funny.
Yeah. And then Lateef has like kind of double connotation. So one side of Lateef means kind and gentle, which we see later on in the film. And then the other side of Lateef means like weak and brittle. Like if you call someone Lateef, it's like almost an insult, because you're like, oh yeah, he's like gentle and whatever, but he's also like fragile. And I think that reflects how early on in the film he's like not given any physical labor jobs because he's Lateef. And then when they do give it to him, all these people are trying to like help him and do him a solid. Like the one Afghan worker like brings him the plaster. He's like, here you go, I brought this for you. He's like, what, you think I'm weak? I can't get it myself. A couple other names. when Sultan comes and brings Baran to Memar, and Memar's like, why would I take this person in? Why can't they say their own name? Like, who is this person? Yada, yada, yada. He says, he's Rahmat. And Rahmat means mercy. He's basically saying take mercy on him, but also his name is Mercy. And that's when Memar's attitude towards him changes. And he's like, okay, fine, I'll take him in. The name Baran, rain is often used in a lot of cultures as a symbol of like rebirth, washing away. And so when we find out that her name is Baran, it's like around the time that we're kind of washing away Lateef's previously antagonistic behavior. Okay, that's all I got.
Critical reactions. This garnered over 13 festival awards and nominations. In Gijon International Film Festival, it won Best Director, Best Screenplay, and the Grand Prix Asturias Award. In FADS, it won 2001 Best Acting. Man, it won a lot. It won Best Acting, Best Director, Best Music, Best Sound Mix, Best Sound Recording, Best Film, Best Director, Best Actress.
Well,
it just swept FADS, yeah.
Well, FADS is the government festival, right?
Yeah. And then I just wanted to quote Ted Shen, who's like one of the top critics on Rotten Tomatoes of the Chicago Reader. He said, the film is remarkable for its naturalistic acting of its cast, particularly the tender performance of the two leads, Hossein Abedini and Zahra Bahrami.
That's interesting that they called out her performance.
Why?
Yeah, I mean, she barely says a word. I feel like that's part of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
But her performance was very facial. She did have some like nice expressions where you could kind of see what she might be thinking.
Yeah.
But I would say she was just like the mute.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like a sack of cement could have played her.
One of the sack of cements that he carried.
Exactly. Yes. Prop her up in the kitchen, make some tea.
Okay, Aisha, then deeper analysis and our interpretation where we talk about the subtext of the film or anything else you want to talk about. Take it away.
I mean, okay, my deeper analysis, I would say that I actually, like if I think about what touches me in the film and like what, even though I feel like it's unrealistically portrayed, I think that Lateef's transformation from someone who's really childish and selfish to someone who thinks more collectively is something that I think is sort of supposed to be some of the deeper philosophy of the film, that he softens and he starts to think about, he does so many selfless acts in the second half of the film. And that, you know, you as an audience start to soften to him as well. And I feel like, you know, what drives it? It's this idea of love. That like love really can bring us closer to our enemy. Because in many ways, he sees Afghans as enemies. You know, he repeatedly says things like, you Afghan. I mean, one of my favorite lines, which we are going to talk about, is, you Afghan, it's all your fault. It's so blatant, it's so direct, but its directness is also kind of refreshing. So I thought like, it is very much about the idea that he finds Afghans as people who take his job, people who work for nothing and probably represent nothing. And then you see this transformation in some ways where love really, you know, opens his eyes to coming closer to whoever he considers the other. So I thought that was sort of like the philosophy of the film in many ways. And it thinks a lot about identity. And I appreciate that in the context of an Iranian film very much because, you know, I really do love Iranian cinema for seeing Afghans in Iran. Because for many years we didn't see any Afghans in the cinema and they would always come to us through Iranian cinema. But I also have to say that Iranian people are probably the people that have said the most racist things to me about being Afghan. So it's sort of double-edged. So seeing this film that humanizes people across any kind of identity is touching.
In those Iranians' defense, you were probably showing them German expressionist films and Farhan just didn't want to pay attention that day to class.
Yeah, Farhan has said some choice things to me.
Yeah, this is true.
No, definitely I feel like.
Usually I reduce it to, you Afghan, and then I walk away.
They're like, you Afghan, it's all your fault.
This is something I'm going to quote heavily from the social history of Iranian cinema, as I often do.
Yeah.
So just forgive me for this, but it's just worth discussion or analysis. And I really, Aisha, I specifically want to know yours because Farhan and I touched on this on our Offside episode. But I want to bring up the topic of transgender masquerade and passing as a way of critiquing the imposed rules.
Oh my God, Kaveh. This film is very much about an Afghan tradition of bacha posh. Do you know that about that?
No, well, please, because you mentioned it earlier and I was going to ask you to bring it up again. So go for it.
Well, that's actually not considered necessarily like transgender masquerading, but it's like a century-old practice in Afghanistan that if you don't have a son that can take care of the women and accompany them to the market or do menial work and bring in extra money. You take one of your daughters, you dress them up as a boy, and you let them live as a boy. So they won't have to do things like make food or anything. They have to go to work. They'll have to accompany the women to the market.
Yes.
So that's actually something that has been done in Afghanistan for a really long time.
Yeah.
And then once the girl hits puberty, they transform back to being and living as a woman.
Whoa.
So, yeah.
So what's the term called again?
Bacha Posh.
There's like a whole Wikipedia article on this. This is wild.
Yeah, it's a practice, actually. There's a whole book written on it as well called Underground Girls of Kabul. And also think about Deborah Ellis, the famous Canadian who wrote the book The Breadwinner, which is all about a girl dressing as a boy to help out.
Yeah.
So, and even the film Osama is also about that. Baran is about that. So this is sort of like a weird, I wouldn't call it a cultural practice, but sort of a way out for Afghan families that they've used for centuries.
Assessing it from a character perspective, and I don't mean necessarily for Baran, but for Lateef.
Yeah.
Like you could play, there's like a sense of homoerotic sensibilities with this guy being maybe like attracted to someone, you know, he's annoyed with her. When Lateef thinks Baran is Rahmat, when he thinks she's a boy, there is this idea of that, like, is he allured by the effeminacy? Is he allured by the androgyny? Is there some sort of attraction there that is being at play there? I mean, a director that's more conscious of these things might have leaned a little bit heavily into this too. It's not that they're saying there's homoeroticism there, but is there a potential that he was always attracted to her? Because he never sees her he never sees her face until realistically the ending. I mean, he sees her from a distance later on. And so I just think there's a version of interpretation that could bring it. Okay, like one example that Nafisi
maybe that's why he's like immediately a jerk to her, because he's like
it's that's
catching
the schoolyard
himself.
bully. Exactly. Okay, like what you said, Faran, and this Nafisi references. Okay, so like Rahmat has a Muslim male name, and Lateef's name is specifically, like as you said, Nafisi says is delicate or beautiful, which are, especially in 80s Iran, more effeminate qualities to name your male protagonist. Right?
Yeah, people use Lateef as an insult.
Right. So I'm just saying that, quoting from Nafisi, the removal of Rahmat's voice renders faces sufficiently androgynous and ambiguous. She doesn't even have a voice to characterize herself as female. Like, she's been robbed of that as a character's perspective, but also it's another layer to the ambiguity of her gender to our character who's attracted to her. You get what I mean?
Kavi, I think you're using psychoanalysis, and I think you're probably right, because there's definitely this like subconscious subtext where you could re-examine Lateef in that kind of lens. Do I think the director intended that? Which is not really an important point, but no. I think he's probably much more of a simplistic thinker, but I think if you were to give it a deeper analysis, you're probably right.
Yeah.
Like there is this sort of homoerotic subtext to the film that you can definitely assign. Because why is he so antagonistic to this kid who does take his job? Yes, we get that. But then there's this transformation, and he gets incredibly attracted when he realizes that it's someone who plays a boy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And like the transformation is so sudden, and it's so, I mean, as I said, for me, it's fantastical and a bit fairy tale-ish that all of a sudden he's like, I'm in love.
And then he goes, movies such as Baran rely on the male counterpart and the spectators being either fooled or fascinated by the masquerade, motivating plot twists and complications driven by sexual ambiguity and desire.
I have a few notes that I've taken here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. There's a lot of emphasis on the duality between Lateef and Baran, like how Lateef tries to kill the birds, and then Baran is seen taking care of the birds. Or how Lateef is like running aggressively with haste and he loses his shoe. But then later when Baran is running, she's running so that she can just like get away and they can get back to their life, and she loses a shoe. Or like how Lateef gives up his ID and his sense of autonomy so that Baran and her family can regain that sense of autonomy and travel and leave. I was wondering if either of you picked up on any of that, on the duality between like how they would often do things that kind of rhymed.
Yeah, some aspects. I feel like some things I definitely knew were supposed to be about that sort of reframing a little later in like a different light. But that kind of, it's flipped now from like the enemy behavior to like the loving behavior. Like even with the tea, you know, the constant sort of, she leaves, there's this beautiful moment where she leaves like a cup of hot tea for him. And remember earlier he like throws it in her face, basically. So there's this constant sort of coming back and revisiting if it's an object, if it's a gesture.
The flower pot.
Yeah, and we are constantly supposed to be aware of the transformation.
Iran is obviously a country where showing hair is forbidden, but we get 2 scenes where we see hair. And one of them is when she's brushing her hair, and that's the reveal that Rahmat is actually Baran. And then the second one is when the bobby pin is left behind. I thought it was intentional, but maybe it wasn't. And there's a single strand of hair in there, and there's like a close up on it. And Panahi has talked about this before, where with censorship on hair, you're allowed to show it when it's been cut off the head.
Yeah.
That you can like full on do a close up, but when it's on the head, you can't. And he's like, this is like ridiculous and it feels really stupid and arbitrary. But
Baran, don't you know hair in its disembodied form is not attractive, but hair when it's on a woman's head will drive men wild, and women have to be protected, Baran. That's the truth.
And to that point, within the sandbox, I thought it was interesting that Majidi is using hair specifically as a representation of femininity and feminine identity.
Yeah. Yeah, but hair is so culturally significant for like Afghans and Iranians, and this idea of a woman with long hair.
Yeah.
So I feel like, yes, of
Arabs
course,
too.
that's what he's using to tantalize you, right? Yeah.
There was a moment in the film where Lateef says to one of the Afghans who's reciting poetry, he says, "You speak really well." And I think it's like such an insulting thing to say, but I'm glad it's in the movie because I've witnessed so many Iranians say stuff like that before to Afghans who are speaking Dari, where they're like, "Oh, you speak Farsi so well." It's like, you're an imbecile. Like, you're such an idiot. Because Dari is a whole other like language and dialect. They have the same roots, but I find it really insulting, and I've seen enough Iranians do it that I'm glad that was in the film. When Lateef gives the money to Baran's father, did that feel a little bit like a symbolic dowry in a bit, or am I like reading too much into that?
That's interesting. You know what? In a way, I did. I think that the thought crossed my mind, where I couldn't actually remember where the film goes. I was like, will now in return the father say, "Do you want one of my daughters?" So it was a fleeting thought, but no, not sure that's what was intended.
I mean, it wouldn't be a symbolic dowry. It would just be a dowry.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true. When he receives the debt note from Sultan, he leaves it in the river. It felt a little bit like the river was kind of washing away the debt. And that also tied back into the second thing for me when it finally rains at the end and it shows spring is here. It's kind of washing away, not the hardship, but like the immediate hard time of the family where they get to go back home. And the use of water to kind of show things are being washed clean and like renewed, new beginnings, all that. Did you guys pick up on that?
I mean, I think water was like a big metaphor. And like in the last shot, I interpreted it more like when you see the footprint and you sort of hear the rain get a bit stronger. I also thought about it as like an emotional tone because melancholy and rain are so closely associated. And because this love can't be, even though they had this moment where they exchanged looks, I felt like it really underpinned that emotion of melancholy and of longing and of like an unrequited love.
Yeah.
From a film theory perspective, from your professional opinion, can you think of instances where water does play is there like a recurring motif in like a certain style of film, like with water? Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, like what do you mean? Like, of course, I think about Deepa Mehta's film Water, which is literally washed in a blue tone, takes place by a river, and uses water consistently as like metaphors of purification, but also in that double-edged way where water can be something that purifies you, but it can also take your life, which in the film happens, right?
Yeah.
One of the characters drowns herself. So I think water is like a very, very common motif.
Spoilers.
Yeah, definitely spoilers. Sorry, ruined it.
Well, because it could also be anything from like cleansing, baptism or whatever, but could also be, it's like also water is often a
Danger.
sexual metaphor too. Well,
Yeah.
like, or lust, eroticism, like the power of the waves, and like it can be used.
Yeah.
It's a very versatile motif.
It is. It's a life-giving thing because we need it to stay alive, but it's also a life-taking thing because it's also dangerous.
Yeah.
So in so many ways, I think water is a very common metaphor.
Yeah.
The arrival of spring at the end as well, like where the snow kind of melts and it goes from snowing to raining. obviously in Afghanistan, in Iran, Tajikistan, a lot of the surrounding countries, spring is marked as a renewal, the new beginnings, rebirth, all that as well. And it could be that stand-in for their new life beginning now that they're leaving. Baran and her family's leaving.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Probably no. Like this idea of like a new, not like a new life necessarily, but like a new chapter.
Yes. Yeah.
Or the end of something. Like winter is always a death, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And spring is always a renewal, a beginning, especially in our cultures because we share the Persian New Year. So it's very symbolic.
Mm-hmm.
There's the very literal metaphor of the footprint in the mud symbolizing the everlasting impression that she's had on his life too. He's left her mark.
That's nice.
Oh, nicely worded, Kave.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to quote, first of all, I also thought it was really interesting, like how bread plays such a pivotal role in real life, like in sustenance. It always goes back to the basic need of like feeding human hunger is bread or rice, right?
Yeah.
And so everywhere he goes, he meets Sultan. When he asks where Sultan has gone off to, he talks to like the shoemaker, and he's like, "Why don't you stay and have some bread?" Sultan offers him to stay and have bread too. He goes to Rahmat's house, and Najaf asks if he'll stay and have some bread. Every person like goes to stay and have some bread. The opening shot of the film is bread being made in an oven.
Kave's opening shot corner.
Yeah. And I just thought that there's an interesting, like, I don't know what more there is to be said about the fact that bread is just a sustenance and nourishment, but it's just all of this is an effort to keep bread on the table. Like people striving to fight to keep money, just to have like $2 together to make bread. Like that's really what it comes down to. I just thought that
Do you
was
think it's like maybe a symbol of like poverty because like they're always offering bread, not necessarily food.
Yeah, it's not
bread
meat.
Yeah, but it's still hospitality because you're offering something and you always have to. But it also felt like such a symbol of like the destitute, you know?
Yeah. But even the shoemaker who seems so poor and is like sewing the shoe together, he's like, "Would you stay and share a piece of bread with me?" Like that was his offer.
Yeah.
Like,
but that's kind of beautiful. You know, it's always like this Yeah, it's always this like must be hospitable even when you have nothing.
Yeah.
I wanted to quote someone else, a professor from University of Sydney named Michelle Langford, who talks about the use of off-screen sound. There's a lot of the opening sounds you hear are hands kneading and slapping dough. And then from there she goes, by using metaphors and off-screen sounds creatively, Majidi is able to retain his viewer's sensorium to privileged sound over vision, thereby injecting a highly effective and potentially erotic or subversive meaning into the film. Throughout the film, the sounds of wind, rain, thunder, running water, the fluttering of fabric, birds' wings, human breath, footsteps, voices, laughter, and birds singing are all used to heighten the embodied sensory perceptions of the viewers and attune them to what must remain unrepresented, relegating to the space beyond the frame. For example, a close-up of Lateef wiping mud off of a coin heightens our sense of touch. By the end of the film, our senses and emotions have become so heightened that we are prepared for the emotionally and sexually charged scene that closes the film. In other words, Michelle Langford is saying that in heightening the things that you don't see in the film, there's a huge communication of what's left unsaid between Baran and Lateef at the end. It's like Majidi's training your mind to constantly be paying attention to things outside of the frame so that you can see that unspoken love between them towards the end, even though, you know, Baran might as well be played by, as some say, a sack of cement. I just thought that's a really interesting assessment of the film. Michelle Langford.
Yeah. It's actually a really nice way of putting it because it makes you revisit and rethink about, you know, all of the sort of looks exchanged, like even if they're in anger or in like desire and so on, that you're supposed to read so much because Baran is literally mute. You have to sort of rely on her gestures or the things she leaves behind, but also a little bit of like how she communicates with her face.
Yes, exactly. Best scene. Aisha, take it away. Your favorite scene in the film.
All right. Okay, so for me, it starts with this beautiful moment where Lateef returns to the spot where he was working and Baran leaves behind a beautiful steaming cup of chai. And then he looks out the window and he sees Baran's being stopped by the inspectors. And then she runs away when the inspectors start running behind her and Lateef magically appears and is also running. And then you have this very almost like 1970s kung fu film type of sound work where you hear heavy breathing and you hear each individual character breathing really heavily. They're running past beautifully composed scenes. And then Lateef manages to catch up with the inspector who's just grabbing Baran. And then he kicks the inspector out of the way. And then you hear a karate chop sound and you hear a really loud slap. And it's like the sound work is like fantastically out of like a action movie from the 70s.
John Woo film or something. Yeah.
Oh God, no, worse. And
sorry, is this your best scene or your worst scene?
It's my favorite scene. When I saw it, I was like, wow, man, this is so amazing. I think I'll explain why it's my favorite. And then Baran runs behind the wall and she like sheds a tear as she's watching Lateef being pulled away. So I felt very double-edged about it because in one way I did not remember the scene and I thought, wow, it does build up sort of the adrenaline. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's quite cheesy and it's how I feel about the film overall. So the scene kind of encapsulates my feelings for the film. I both enjoyed it and I thought it was a little bit laughable at moments.
That single tear won her Best Actress.
And that's why she couldn't be played by a sack of cement.
Kaveh, you go next because I'm like stuck between two.
When he first discovers her, but discovers her via silhouette, I thought the framing of that shot was really nice. And the shadow scene of the hair coming out. Like, she looked really beautiful, actually. It was a very beautiful shadow silhouette. I'm like, oh, wow. But I also really want to match that with the final scene. I think the final scene was filled with so much of that poetic imagery that Majidi is quite famous for, at least in this film. So, and the footprints. These are like kind of the moments. So that final scene and when he first discovers that Rahmat's Baran. Those are my two favorites. Yeah,
that reveal that Rahmat is actually Baran, that was one that really stood out to me. I think my favorite scene was actually there's a moment where we get this exterior wide shot of the construction site. And there's lights lit up throughout the building, but there's like shades pulled, so you see silhouettes of people throughout, and it looks like a tableau. And then we cut inside and we're showing that everyone's playing music together and singing together and eating food. And then the camera cranes down and we find Lateef lying down by himself looking very concerned. I thought that was my favorite scene.
Damn, that's poetry. We discuss our favorite quotes in the film.
I only have one.
Say it.
And it might be cheating because it might actually be a line of poetry. The flame that burns my heart draws a warmth from the fire of separation. And then he says, wow, you speak really well. And then he responds, it's the hadith of the heart, my dear boy.
این شعله‌کی جوشی مهربانی است از گرمی آتشی جدایی است.
شما خیلی قشنگ حرف میزنی ها.
حدیث دل پسر جون.
Wow.
I was like, yo.
That is deep.
Yeah, and the subtitles do not do that exchange justice.
Beautiful. I did not catch that at all since I don't speak Farsi or Dari. I would say my favorite part is, here you guys have to help me a little if I remember it right or not, but do you remember when the inspector comes the first time and he says, or the second time, and he says, are there any Afghans here? And Lateef is standing next to the foreman and he says, only one. He said, oh yeah? Who? And he goes, it's me. I work harder than the Afghans and still I'm treated like dirt. And I was like, wait, that doesn't make sense. But I kind of liked it. I think it was supposed to make a point.
Right.
یه چند کارگر افغان کار میکنن؟
یه نفر.
خب کیه؟ کجاست؟
همین جناب آلا.
خوشمزه هم که هستی؟
بابا این از افغانی هم بیشتر کار میکنم. بیشترم فوش میشنوم.
Yeah, it's almost like a sudden tense moment because he's like only one and the guy's like, what are you, like Maymar's like looking up like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah,
like, it's me.
Yeah. Like, I am the Afghan.
Yeah.
I will also say at that point in the film, because it was still very early on in the film, I didn't realize that he was like playing a joke, and I was like, is he supposed to be Afghan? Why didn't they get an actual Afghan actor to play this character? He sounds Azeri.
It was like, yeah, that moment is a tiny bit confusing, but I kind of liked it because I had to think about it a bit more.
Right.
What's he trying to say? But then he also says, I work harder than the Afghans. So then you're not an Afghan.
And the inspector says, get out of here, stop wasting my time.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if he was an Afghan, the guy would have taken
Yeah,
him away.
no, it's split second later I figured it out. But
yeah.
I didn't find too many quotable moments. I wrote here, Farhan's favorite quote will either be one of the two following. I wrote, a man alone is a neighbor of God. Or it will be from the hot fire of being apart comes the flame that burns the heart.
Oh, Kaveh,
that was the second one.
You should rename this. No, you should rename this section as where Kaveh guesses what is Farhan's favorite.
Yeah, I guess it would be one of those two. But so I thought the poetry in the scene was more the visual poetry and not that's poetry dialogue.
Mm.
But I would say I'll take the other one. A Man Alone is a Neighbor of God. I found something profoundly interesting about it. Like it's almost half of an intelligent quote.
آدمی تنها همسایش خداست.
Like I almost want to
A
dissect
man alone is a neighbor of God. Yeah,
it. It's worth an analysis. Like you could surmise some stuff from it. And as an agnostic, I'm just like, all right, that's fascinating. That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're really right. The dialogue is not the strong suit of this film. Like, even as I was saying earlier, the line where he goes, Lateef several times is like berating Rahmat and goes, "You're an Afghan, it's your fault." I'm like, wow, it's so literal. It's so direct.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, it makes the point of what the character is feeling. But yeah, I was like, that's not a strong suit here.
Favorite performance? Aisha, please go first. I'd love to know your thoughts.
OMG, this is actually really hard for me. But I have to say that I really loved the old Afghan dudes. So Sultan, for example, was
that's
what
true.
what a beautiful face.
Yeah, that is.
I
beautiful.
really loved his wrinkles. I loved his expression. He looked kind without trying. So I feel like for me, he was like a person, even when we see that scene where you don't see him, his face, but you hear him crying and he's talking about his brother. I was very touched by that actor. So I feel like he's a standout for me.
Wait, Sultan or Najaf? Najaf was the father who breaks his leg early on, and we don't see him for a lot of the film.
No, so then it's Sultan. I'm conflating the two since they're related,
okay,
but it's more Sultan, I think. And also when he shows up at the construction site and implores him to take the boy as a worker. Yeah, I just thought he had all my sympathies.
Yeah.
I was mixed on Lateef, to be honest. So him getting Best Actor awards is kind of puzzling to me.
I'll go next just off of what you just said. I was mixed on Lateef too, because I thought like a few times I was trying to assess his crying, and I wasn't that. I was underwhelmed by his crying performance in the film, and yeah, it was hit or miss for me. And so I would give it to Aisha's favorite sack of cement, Zahra Bahrami, only because I actually think a lesser actor, and I'm again like Zahra Bahrami is probably not this professionally trained actor, right? It's like really likely like they tried to like a small addition of people they could get, but I think a lesser actor would have given way too much over performance in a lot of those emotional beats. And I think that the fact that there's subtlety and a lot of it's held back, it feels like, again, acting with eyes. And it's very muted. I'm choosing from like not great selection of choices here, but I just thought a worse actor might have played that too harsh.
I mean, she had her moments. I give you that, Kaveh. She had to have some very emotional moments with her eyes. Even like the last scene, I feel like she had some expressions you could read into. But overall, I have to say, like 80% of the time when she's on screen, you literally are like, okay, anyone could have played her because she doesn't speak. She's from afar. It's more about, So I'm more commenting on the fact that literally women have no role in this film.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Baran.
I'm going to give a runner-up to the shoe cobbler. Like, actually, I thought that he was really good, even though he was only on the screen for like 20 seconds. But I think I'm going to give it to Mohammad Amir Naji, who plays Memar.
Farhan, I could have guessed that. This is what Aisha could have guessed.
He had the most range.
I mean,
yeah. He just had, I think his character had the most range. So I think just as an actor, he had more to work with. And I don't necessarily think that means that he's a better actor. I think it just means that he had more to work with. Yeah, like our running joke that Baran could have been played by a sack of cement. And that's nothing to do with the actor. It's everything to do with the way that the character was written. There's just nothing there for her. And the other characters as well, there's very little complexity to them. The exception is Lateef, and I wasn't really sold by his performance as much as I was Memar's.
I'd agree.
We're moving on to a new category called Festival of Cons. This is essentially our nitpicks, hot takes, and what aged poorly, but we're also including least favorite scenes. And so cons being any kind of grievances you want to bring up, any cons as opposed to pros, all lumped into one section in an effort to expedite stuff. So Festival of Cons. Aisha, please take it away.
OMG. For me, I would definitely say gender. The big con of this film is, if it's supposed to be about love, why, if it doesn't feel like the woman that he falls in love with, the girl, let's also remember that she looks like she's 12 years old. is played by someone who never says a freaking word. Could we at least like have her be a bit more of a filled out character in private moments?
Yeah.
And like this film, you know, like I just feel like that to me is something that is not news in 2002 when the film came out. So it's not like I'm talking and accusing something of gender or like mismanagement from like the 1800s. So for me, I feel like that's something where I think about if you're making a film about love and about the transformation of a man due to the fact that he falls in love, why is the object of his love a mute 12-year-old?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, she needed a bit more, like maybe show her in moments with her little sister speaking or like buying bread or like she needed a character. And I think that to me is a frustrating aspect because using women as foils is like really fucking tiring.
That was my hot take. Or what age poorly. I just said like giving her some lines of dialogue or action outside of. I understand why she had to be mute when on construction site, but then she isn't after 50 minutes into the movie. So let's see
and
her
also she's at home. We never see her speak. She works in the river pulling stones. We never see her speak. And also the film feels like the Bechdel test. She has like no women that she hangs out with or talks to or anything. She lives in this male world, which, okay, if you're making a film about a construction site, sure. But you're making a film about love.
Yeah.
Not one word from her in the entire movie. Not one.
Yeah, it's truly puzzling to me.
Yeah.
Far on Festival of Cons.
I would echo that. I would also say that it would have been nice to see some Dari in the film. Like when we do see the Afghans speaking with the Iranian characters, they're speaking like Farsi Persian. They're not speaking Dari. And Iranians and Afghans who speak Farsi and Dari can understand each other. It's different, but they can understand each other. And it would have been nice to see that in the film. But instead, they had the Afghan characters speaking like the Persian dialect, which I thought, in my opinion, I think that was a mistake. I also took issue with this is like a very, very minor nitpick, but some of the sound effects work bumped me a little bit. Like one was the karate chop that you mentioned. It was just like, oh, this feels very dated. There's like a scene where he hits the inspector and it just goes, like it's like straight up a 70s kung fu sound effect. And then also when Baran falls in the water and she screams and it's like slowed down, it ends up sounding like a ring wraith from Lord of the Rings. I was just like, oh.
Yeah, add to that, like the Baran moment, for example, I feel like there's so many moments in the film where like it's over sentimentalized. Like when she's pulling the rocks out of the freaking river and you have to watch it and she's just like laboring so hard and facial expressions. And part of me was also like, why are these women pulling rocks out of a river? Like it makes no sense, this task.
Yeah.
Double feature lineup. If you were going to be screening a double feature of films back to back, what would you pair Baran with?
I mean, on one hand, I would do a Majidi doubleheader and then do Children of Heaven because he seems to like to work with kids. And I also feel like you notice so many trademarks of his. The running scenes in Children of Heaven are like, mwah, next level. And I feel like he uses aspects of that in this film. And I think that he thinks a lot about poverty and humanism and all these sort of themes that we've already mentioned. And I think to see them in these two films would be back to back, will kind of make you understand what he's thinking about.
I paired it up with two potential options. One, you could go like through a love story in impossible circumstances. And I thought of the Palestinian film Omar, which is, I saw it at TIFF many years ago when it came out. I'm trying to remember what year. Let me Google it.
Which is way more political.
Oh, yes. The film Omar is?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. It would be interesting because you have this one that's like not really looking at the context necessarily politically, and then Omar does.
2013 is the year it came out. I just thought interesting avenues of looking at lesser seen love stories, even though all the criticisms we brought up about how is this a love story? How's Baran? But then also from titles alone, I thought of this and you mentioned it was just for titles alone. It'd be fun to have Baran double featured with Deepa Mehta's Water. Water and Rain. Those are my two fun ones.
That's good.
Baran, you would pair this up with Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
That's the one. No, I was trying to think of a movie that had commentary on migrant workers.
Oh, that's great.
And then I realized something. I went through a list of like tons of movies that were about migrant workers. And I hadn't seen any of them. And a lot of them were like intentional choices by me because I was like, oh, this feels very like self-congratulatory. I don't want to see this movie.
This film would also be really great with like movies about Afghan migrants in Iran or films by Iranian directors about Afghans.
Like Kandahar.
Or like I was about to say, at 5 p.m, which is a film all about a woman who speaks and who wants to be president. And I think it's done by an Iranian director and an interesting take on Afghanistan. So I think that would be really interesting to see that through the lens of an Iranian female director about a woman as like a strong main character versus this film where she's like an afterthought.
Samira Makhmalbaf. Okay.
Yeah.
You know what? I haven't seen it, but based on your description, that's the one I'm going to go with. Because I was going to default to just like two of Majidi's films, just because I was like, I guess I'll just do a Majidi double feature. But this actually sounds like a better double feature lineup. The other thing I was thinking was a movie where women pretend to be men.
Mrs. Doubtfire?
Yeah. No, Mr. Man.
Yeah.
Was because the movie doesn't actually do anything with the gender topic of the film. It's just like a narrative.
It's like a premise they use without digging into it.
It's just a narrative tool. It's not actually very deep. So yeah, at 5 p.m. sounds good to me.
What a cop-out. You just heard of 3 seconds ago.
Well, I was going to pair it with either Children of Heaven or Color of Paradise. Yeah, just because it's two of his films, and it'd be cool to see the evolution of his work.
Can this be a modern Hollywood remake?
Ooh.
I said I don't really know. I feel like a film like this has already been done by Hollywood a bunch of times. It's like the love story arc is played out and a little tired. I said, I guess you can make it about migrant Mexican workers living in the U.S.
There's hundreds of them.
I feel like I've seen this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't like name one of them I couldn't think of, but like if there was going to be a modern Hollywood remake of Baran, maybe it would be like Mexican workers working in the U.S.
Oh, wow. Play that one out for yourself. So it'd be like a Mexican girl who pretends to be a boy who goes to a construction site, never says a word.
No dialogue.
Yeah. I was like, oh, interesting.
I don't want to see a modern Hollywood remake of this film.
Yeah, I don't really either.
Yeah, no. I don't think so
it's
either.
no's all around.
Definitely a no.
Okay, final thoughts and grades. Aisha, please start.
I would give Baran a B minus. And I stand by it. I feel like that's actually very apt about how I feel about this film. I think Baran, now seeing it a second time, I think I'm much more waffling on my opinion on this film. And I think it's worth seeing because it does explore some interesting humanist, more universal feelings and philosophies that you could definitely live by and that I would endorse. But at the same time, it's not a film that's flawless and the acting is a bit, hot and cold. And I would say that it has its problems, which we've discussed, including gender.
I liked Baran. I would give this film a B minus. What I really appreciated about this film was that the language of cinema that it uses was not typical for a lot of Iranian films. So that was kind of refreshing to see in a context of Iranian cinema. It definitely felt more Western in its use of camera work and even just some of the subject matter. But I also think that is something I didn't like about the movie, is that it grazes surface level topics without getting in too deep about the implications of what's going on in the plot. Like, I think that there was a missed opportunity to really comment on gender roles in the film. It was very poetic. I thought the acting was overall pretty good from most of the actors. And the little bits of music that we got really left an impact on me. I did like seeing an Iranian filmmaker commenting on, in a very shallow way, admittedly, but commenting on the racism of Iranians towards Afghans. And you know what? That's also a missed opportunity. That could have been explored further. B minus.
I also give it a B minus. That's funny that we're all pretty aligned. I think its strengths were its cinematic language, visual poetry, the use of lighting and crane shots in a way I hadn't seen too often in a film of that era. Maybe because it's a later film. It actually strangely feels like an older film than it is. It's a 2001 film?
Yes.
At times I keep thinking it was made in 89 or something. Doesn't it feel that way? Like it's a late 80s film or early?
Yeah, it feels like to me like a film from like early era Iranian cinema.
Yeah, Aisha, every time you bring up the criticism about like women in this film, I'm just like, at first I was thinking like that's like pretty typical for Iranian films at the time, because I think about Kiarostami's does not write female characters at all or well for the most part. Panay doesn't either. And then I kept thinking, like, but the movies I'm thinking of are all from the late 80s. You're right. Like, this is a relatively modern film for a film that's ignoring to write strong female voices.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not without its flaws. And it's worth watching. And there's a lot of interesting things in it, perhaps missable in the pantheon of Iranian cinema.
That means that our official grade from Cinema Rex podcast for this film is B-.
I'm going to give a wrap up and then thank you guys for coming. Well, thank you, Aisha, for coming. Baran, thank you also for being a guest on my show.
You're welcome. Thanks. I'll be back anytime.
For better or for worse, Majidi's Baran is cinema pure and simple. The only female character doesn't speak. It's not a colorful film, and yet it is so stunning to look at because the raw Iranian landscape is beautifully captured. Majidi's films are subtle, depicting the hardships of Afghan refugees living in Iran and the consequences of war, but doing so with a touch of humor that brings genuine charm to his films. Blending that with astonishingly clever use of symbolism, which stays with you in fleeting images of gazing faces, bread in a stone oven, small fires lit against the chill. Look no further than a footprint in the mud representing the imprint Baran's had on Lateef's heart. A tale as old as time, but with a fresh lens, we see the bratish, selfish, vindictive boy become kind, passionate, and selfless, all in the pursuit of love. Baran is truly a unique and enlightening experience. Films like this are a rare breed and are not easy to find. Aisha, thank you for joining us and being a guest on our show.
Thank you, Aisha.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Baran, you know how I feel about you.
Unfortunately, Kaveh, thank you for all that you do.
Thank you to all our listeners for tuning in. Be Omid Didar.
Bye.
Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.